is going live, is gone live. So, what you have shared? 1 second. ये वाला शेयर किया है? Load. हम शेयर कर पाएंगे ना? हाँ?
नाइट तो आ गया आपका
वीडियो आ रहा होगा नहीं? इसको इसमें इंटायर स्क्रीन अभी क्या दिख रहा है? हाँ, अभी आया वो पिक्चर? तो मैं चैट बॉक्स में अभी मैंने वापस वहाँ चला गया तो मिरर इमेज बन गया, इनफाइनाइट इमेज बन गया, राइट? मैं चैट तुम भी डाल सकते हो ना, चैट सेक्शन में तुम डाल दो। क्योंकि मैं फिर ये शिफ्ट करूँगा ना तो फिर से आएगा, ठीक है? तो मैं अभी ऐसा करके छोड़ रहा हूँ एंड आई विल अगेन, क्योंकि जब मैं Good evening, everyone. We'll wait for a couple of minutes till more members joins and they settle in. So I hope you can see my screen. You can put a thumbs up if it is clearly visible to you. And if I'm audible clearly, then you can put up a thumbs up in the chat box. Thank you. We will just wait for 2 more minutes because I can see the number is jumping quickly, the number of attendees. So let everybody settle in. So we'll begin at 4:05 precisely. So check your speaker if I'm not audible because I can see others can hear me. All right, so we will get started. Good evening, everyone, once again, and a warm welcome to this session on critical thinking. My name is Abhishek Kariwal. I am one of the co founders of open door education. And I can see some familiar names in the chat box here. So, a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of IIT Madras. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, but I'm an educationist and a question designer by profession. So, most of you know the core area in which open door education works in. We primarily work in designing good questions and making students think. But for the last 2 years, we have been doing research on critical thinking. We're trying to understand what is critical thinking and how it can be improved in the school system, how it can be improved or implemented in the classroom. So I'd request teachers to not to write anything in the chat box and just focus on the presentation. So there are going to be questions in the presentations. So in that case, you can feel free to answer. That will make it more interactive. I might create a poll also at times, and then you can take part in that. So welcome once. So this is going to be the content presentation. So first I will go with, we'll talk about what is critical thinking, then we'll get into why is critical thinking important. Then we'll also try to understand who are critical thinkers, and then we'll get into nuances of critical thinking, various skills and the behaviors involved in critical thinking. And lastly, we'll also be talking about the ways in which you can implement at your skill, at your school. So before I get into what is critical thinking, I'd like to get your opinions, your understanding of critical thinking in one word. So the moment you hear this phrase critical thinking, we all know some way or the other we have some idea about thinking. But I want to know your understanding of the word critical. The moment you hear the word critical, what comes to your mind? So you can type in the chat box. So the question is, the moment you hear the word critical, what comes to your mind? I'm getting to get interesting responses here. So first response was difficult, out of the box, analyze, complicated, application, judgment, innovative, brainstorming, analysis, tough, analyze, complicated. All right, you can stop now sharing your thought. So I've got a broad understanding um, of your thought process, and we had asked same questions to people I meet usually, and one of the words that comes to your mind is difficult. Critical means something which is of difficult nature, and it gets associated with difficult problem solving. So when you solve a difficult problem, then you are doing critical thinking. Sometimes it is also related to other words. Some of the words are closely related, but some of the words are something that intuitively comes to your mind, which may not be the correct representation of critical thinking, which may not be the correct definition of critical thinking. All right, now you can again stop typing. We'll move to the next question. So before I take you to the idea of critical thinking, I want to tell you something else before. I want you to judge each and every example. So on your screen now, you can stop typing for the previous question. Here's another question: is this an example of critical thinking? So there's a question in front of the screen, a maths question. Do you require critical thinking to solve this problem? You can say either yes or no. Okay, so I'm reading your responses and I'll point out to somebody who has written no or yes, and I'll be happy if you could respond to if I read out your name, you could write explanation why you think either yes or no. Okay, so I will ask Miss Sweta Jha. I see that you have written no. Can you type in why do you think it's no? Some are also saying yes, but overwhelming majority is saying no. I want to ask Miss Shweta Jha or Miss Chandrika Tripathi. Okay, I'm getting to get some responses because it has set formula through which it can be solved. Yes, I'm very poor in mathematics. Needs only knowledge and application of basic mathematics. So I won't invest further time on it. This is not an example of critical thinking. The overwhelming majority is right because it requires a set rule. It requires a set rule, and we just need to follow the rule. So whenever we are following a rule, it is not critical thinking. We still need to know what exactly is critical thinking, but this is very clear whenever you are following a set of rules. Somebody has said that hey, you need to solve the bracket first, then you have to do division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. You are following a set of rules. This is not critical thinking. Let's move to the second example. Okay, second is a physics question. Now you can stop typing for the previous question. Okay, let's come to this. We'll come to why that is not critical thinking in much more detail, but for now, we are just broadly saying that it is not critical thinking. All right. Now, for this example, it says that if your mass is 20 kg on Earth, then what will be your mass on the moon? You don't need to answer that question per se, but you need to tell, is this an example of critical thinking? For this question, mass question. I'm getting to see some no's and some yeses. So this time the percentages of yeses seems to be a bit more. Okay, can anybody answer this question that we are on the mass question, not on the bod mass question, but why you do not require critical thinking to answer the question? All right, so I get first response from Creative World and says no because it has a rule to find the mass. Again, you need to know the concept, not critical thinking, just apply 1 by 6. So here 1 by 6 door is not the correct answer because mass remains the same whether it is moon or the earth, but nevertheless, it is just a set of laws that we are applying here. So mass does not change with place, it is just a formula based. All right. So all of you are correct here. If you are thinking that this is not an example of critical thinking, because we are applying a learned idea here, again following a set of understanding here. So whenever we follow certain thing, it is not critical thinking, but still we have not answered what is critical thinking. Okay, so let us move to the next question. Here I'll do the polling and I want to see how we fare in the polling. This is a simple one. I'm skipping this. So again, I don't want to take a poll on this. Which enzyme helps in digestion of protein? When we answer this question, then also we are not applying critical thinking because it is again a simple recall of the information. Now, let me ask another question. Now, for this, I am going to create a poll. Okay, so once the poll comes, then you can take part in that. So poll is being generated. You can take part in that. Asking question why sky blue, an example of critical thinking. Okay. So here we see a good majorities. Right now, 72% of the people says that it is an example of critical thinking, which is now somewhere close to 72 and 73. So the question is, there's there's a small kid in grade one, and he or she looks at the sky and asks, why is sky blue? So I've given you more context to it. So is the act of asking this question critical thinking? Okay, so here majority of you are saying it is an example of critical thinking, but there's still good chunk around 27% of the people still think that it is not an example of critical thinking. It's a deep level thinking. Okay, so previous few questions were very straightforward in nature, and it was very evident that you don't need a very difficult form of thinking. Even if you define critical thinking as a difficult kind of a thinking, it does not fit into that definition. Now, asking question why is sky blue? This is an intriguing. This is something interesting. This is something creative, right? This is something that requires a curious mind, right? It looks like that it is an example of critical thinking because we associate all good things with critical thinking, but they are separate. They are separate skills for each of the things that we do or the way we learn. So my answer is this is not an example of critical thinking. This is a small section, a small behavior that is needed for critical thinking, which is called as curiosity. So when a student asks this question, why is sky blue? He or she is expressing his or her curious nature. It is not an example of critical thinking because this reflects the curious nature, right? But it can lead to critical thinking. It can be a starting point, but it is not a core of critical thinking. So we know that all good things are not critical thinking. Curiosity is not critical thinking. It is a good thing to have, right? What else is not critical thinking? Okay, so like we said, all difficult things are critical thinking. Solving a Sudoku puzzle, that 9 by 9 grid, 3 by 3 grid, is not critical thinking. There we are doing something, there again we are following a set of rules, not purely a form of critical thinking. Making a creative design of a chair, is this an example of critical thinking? No, that falls under creativity. That's again an excellent uh, skill to have, but that is not critical thinking. Solving a difficult mathematics problem, not always it is critical thinking. In most of the cases, it is not. So now we have separated all the good things aside, many of the good things aside that you might be thinking, you might be including in the critical thinking definition. I just want to bring your idea over here is that everything good is not critical thinking. Okay, now let me take you through what is, and some of you are writing thinking out of the box is again not critical thinking. It, it is more of a creative thinking. So in this session, we are going to learn precise definition of critical thinking. And after this session, we'll not mix it up with creative thinking, out of the box thinking, right? We'll have a very precise and thorough understanding of what is critical thinking. Okay, let's move further. So what is critical thinking? All right. Now here's the uh, definition, a very well accepted definition, if I may say that this is a origin word of the critical thinking. It has come from a Greek word called kritikos, which means able to judge or capable of discerning. I could read some of the chats. Somebody has written judgment. If we have to define critical thinking in one word, it has to be judgment. because its root word is judgment itself, criticos. Now we might be wondering that how judgment help us in doing good things, how judgment help us in being a better learner, and why at all judgment is needed. Because all this while we never teach students to judge or evaluate in the classroom. We ask them to understand things, but we'll soon realize that judgment has a very important role to play when we understand things. Without judgment, we cannot understand things. All right, so we'll dive further into this definition. So now let us try to evaluate with this definition all the other questions that I asked. When I say why is sky blue, I'm not judging the sky. I'm questioning that hey, why it is blue. Okay, it is not a pure form of a judgment. It is a curiosity. When I say solve this question, I'm not judging. I'm applying a set of rules. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. Okay. Now let us see through a different example. I'll come back to this sky question later, but let's look at this example. Okay, now we will try to apply our idea of critical thinking that we learned just now, that critical thinking means to judge, or in other words, to evaluate. So somebody tells you this information that do you know, hey, do you know that the earth is rotating continuously with a high speed of 1600 kilometer per hour? Somebody comes up with, may not be the teacher, but a friend comes to you that do you know that? Or it could be teacher as well. Or you are reading this in the book that do you know that the earth is rotating continuously with a high speed of 1600 kilometer per hour? If you are not doing critical thinking or you are not in the mode of critical thinking, you just agree and move on. Thinking, hey, that's a good information to have. It's an interesting information. It says a high speed, but if you have to judge this information, okay, you want to question this. What would you ask further? Let's say I am telling you that do you know that the Earth is rotating continuously with a high speed of 1600 kilometer per hour? 1600 kilometer per hour is really high speed. On our national highways, good national highways, we run at a speed of 120 or 140 kilometer per hour at max. This is 1600 kilometer per hour. So way more than what is the fast, usually the fast cars move in India. What would you ask? What will be evaluation question in this case? So now think. I'm ending the previous poll. Okay, now you can you can judge this expression or just this information. What would you do? So, audience, you just need to do a judgment of this expression. So, I'm waiting for to read interesting responses on this, or you need to tell why you don't believe this statement. So, I made it simpler now. Okay, so the first interesting question that I get is 1600 kilometer really high? Electrons revolve at much higher speed. So we are question. This is a good example of the judgment, but it's in another direction. So Mr. Asit is judging the word high over here. That is it. How do you define the word high? I don't agree that this is high. For me, it is not high. Okay. More, it could be in different contexts as well. If Earth rotates at such a high speed, why don't we feel it? Miss Richa Joshi, that's an excellent evaluation question. That ki, hey, it's at 1600 kilometer per hour. That's okay. That's high enough. But why don't we feel it? 1600 kilometer per hour. This is the act of asking this question is critical thinking. So usually critical thinking does not let you solve question, but it lets you ask relevant questions so that you can understand that information deeper. right? So let's say somebody asks me that, hey, I don't feel it, which means I don't believe in this information because I want to learn more about it. So the moment you ask this question, you will get another information and that will strengthen your understanding. Another question that I get is, if it's rotating at such a high speed, why can't we feel it? That is already done. Due to movement, why the things are still stable at one place? This is another good question. And this is what is act of asking this question is critical thinking. That key, hey, it is moving, why things are not falling apart? It's really high speed. Okay, so I got all three questions and all three were in the direction of critical thinking. Okay, I'll take one more question, then we'll move to different example. Now we are getting to get the sense of what is critical thinking. When we ask this question, we are not necessarily thinking creatively. Our objective is towards that information. Creative brain will help you come up with more questions, but you want to just evaluate this information. Asking these questions is not a very difficult act as well. Our objective is just to find whether it is right or wrong. Okay, so we have one broad sense now that critical thinking means that when an information is presented, you tend to evaluate it, not to prove somebody wrong, but to get a better understanding of it. Okay, let's move to next question. Now we come back to that idea of why is sky blue. So now we realize that act of asking question comes from starting question comes from curiosity, but when we evaluate something, it becomes a part of a core part of a critical thinking. Now here's an example. So now that question is gone. You can stop typing. Let's move on to the new example. We are connecting the sky is blue case. Explanation of why sky blue is somebody gave this explanation. The sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it. So we get this explanation somebody gave, right? Would you agree with this explanation? You don't have to apply your own knowledge of it. Just assume that you don't know anything about the explanation of why is sky blue. We have to apply critical thinking to this information. What would you say? Why would you believe or not believe this statement? The sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it. How would you contradict this statement? What would you ask further? Would you really accept this explanation that the sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it? Okay, I get one response from Miss Anuradha Sharma, and she says that why do we not see blue in the sunlight? This is a good example of a critical thinking question. That if the sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it, okay, fine, but sunlight itself does not look blue. Okay, first tell me that why it doesn't look blue, then I will try to understand. Another question that came is that sunlight has all the colors. Okay, sunlight has yellow color also. What is so special about blue color? I'm just extending your question. So this explanation is not complete. Why now we are able to say this explanation is not complete? Because we evaluated the explanation. Had we not used our critical thinking, we would have agreed to this explanation. Okay, the sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it. For a moment, it looks correct. Yeah, sunlight has a blue, so sky will be blue. But when we think further, we get a question that, hey, sunlight has all the color. What's so special about blue? Then we get an explanation related to scattering that blue color scatters the most. There also you can do judgment. Hey, what is scattering? Why blue color scatters the most? Right. So this is not an act of answering, but this is an act of questioning, but questioning relevant questions which will guide you to understand the information. All right. So I hope all of you are with me, and you have gotten an idea of what is critical thinking. It is not creative thinking. It is not about answering difficult questions. It is about asking the right questions when somebody gives you an information. When somebody tells you, ki, hey, uh, I wake up every morning at 4 o'clock, and you see that person waking up late at night, 2 p.m. Sorry, 2 a.m. And that person say that wake up at 4 a.m. You'll get a doubt in your mind. The act of getting this is a very simplest example. This act of getting doubt is critical thinking. Then you question that person. Hey, how do you manage with just 2 hours of sleep? It does not look possible. All right. So again, I'm reiterating that point that critical thinking is judgment. Okay, so on this, as the sky is blue because sunlight has a blue color in it. A critical thinker will find the above answer unconvincing. If you are not critical thinker, will get convinced with this answer, and that is not a good thing to do because in today's world, the information is freely flowing, and the critical thinking skills help you to evaluate and absorb the right information. Okay, let's move to another interesting example. So we'll take a couple of more examples, then we'll get into the next part of critical thinking. Now you can stop typing if you are still answering the previous question. Example 2 says that people from country Kyrgyzstan. So have any one of you have heard the word Kyrgyzstan country? You may not have heard, may have heard the similar word because this is an imaginary country. People from the country Kyrgyzstan are very intelligent. I know this because I have met two intelligent people from Kyrgyzstan in my organization. Okay. Somebody tells you, and if you're not thinking critically, you'll agree to that information. Ki, hey, Kyrgyzstan people are very intelligent. Okay, that's the knowledge that I have. But that knowledge is not a knowledge. That is just an incorrect. That may be an incorrect information that may be occupying some space in your brain, which at the first place should not occupy. Okay, so I get the first question. How can you evaluate on the basis of only two people from creative world again? Not convinced by the information. Depends upon which age group of students you're asking. All right. So what can you? So the first question that comes is that hey, with two people, how can you make a statement for an entire country? Right. Can the skill of two people be representative of a large population? So that's the first question that comes to your mind. Can there be more questions? Think. So one question is very clear that two people cannot be representative of the entire sample size. I got another interesting question from Miss Madhuri Kakade. She says that what is the criteria of intelligence? Right. So this is another idea that hey, how did you evaluate the intelligence? How could you even judge the intelligence? Did you just speak to them, or did you have a any IQ test or scientific method to evaluate the intelligence? So that still is questionable. That key, if it is just your opinion, then it may not be right to say that they're intelligent. It's generalization. All right. So now we understand that any information that is given to you needs to be evaluated, needs to be checked, and it doesn't happen all the time. So when we are learning, when we are getting information, we usually don't evaluate it. We either say it right or wrong, or we sometimes look at it in black and white. We may have biases while we are reading somebody's information. If it's given by some source, we tend to believe it more than the other. But information, critical thinking is not done to find out whether the source is correct or not. Even if the source is 100% correct, then also you must do critical thinking. For example, if somebody tells you Newton's law, which has been well accepted, we know that it is a correct law. But even then, you must do critical thinking over that because that will give you a deeper understanding of it. Okay, so this kind of, if we make a judgment for the entire country based on two people, this kind of uh, fallacy is called as overgeneralization, which is something opposite to critical thinking. So this is our first learning. Critical thinking means to evaluate or judge. So learning number one so far. And we are again reiterating the information. It is the process of judging or evaluating an information to understand it better and to make better decisions. So a critical thinker will have these two, these are the general two questions. I need more clarity. Hey, this does not seem quite right. This does not seem clear to me. Even if it is given by a greatest scientist in the world, I did not understand it. I am not convinced. Because critical thinking is not to be done to prove somebody wrong, but to get convinced by myself on that information. Okay, so with the first learning, let's move further. So we have been talking, hey, this is critical thinking. We need to judge and we need to evaluate. We need to find the truth. But why is critical thinking important for students? Okay, so now we are trying to understand from the student's point of view. That somebody might be thinking, many of you might be thinking that, hey, why do we need to do all of this? If teacher can explain everything, then what is the need of doing all of this? There is a need. If you explain everything to students clearly and students are not asking questions, it is just an information for them. They are not having a deeper understanding. They are not having deeper connect. They are going to forget it sooner or later. Okay, so now let's apply critical thinking to this piece of information. Okay, this piece of information is given to students. Now let's think like students and let's try to compare. If you don't apply critical thinking, what happens? If you apply critical thinking, then what happens? So this is a paragraph taken from a textbook. Uh, Say that Earth is in danger. Scientists reveal the alarming discovery that the melting of polarized sheets have changed the way mass is distributed across the Earth, altering its axis and spin, leading to untold future implications. Now let me tell you, this information is correct. This is not like my previous information, made up information. This is from a well accepted literature, well accepted book, which is correct. So we have one choice to accept it and move on, and we'll have a piece of information. But a critical thinker will have a set of questions in the mind uh, to understand it deeper. So you can type in your responses. I will tell how a typical student, what would be the series of thoughts, a stream of thoughts that would go into the brain while when we are reading from a critical thinking point of view. So the first thing that comes to my mind when I read this is that it says that scientists reveal the alarming discovery that the melting of polar ice sheets have changed the way mass is distributed across the Earth. The first question when I read this information that came to my mind is that hey, if ice is melting, why would it change the mass distribution across the Earth? Because mass will remain the same. Why would it change the mass distribution? Okay, so I may have some lack of knowledge because of which I'm asking the question, but I must ask this question. So when I ask this question that hey, why melting would change the mass distribution, mass remains the same. I got an answer in my mind that hey, mass and mass distribution are two different things. Okay, mass is the net mass. Mass distribution means how it is spread all across the Earth. So polar ice caps are being solid; they are concentrated more on the poles, so which means there is more mass on the poles. And if it melts, that entire mass will distribute all across the ocean. So definitely, it is going to change the mass distribution. In what way does mass spin affect the axis of the Earth? So this is another interesting question. Hey, if mass is not distributed or changing, how will it change the axis? Because the Earth anyway rotates with a fixed axis. So when we ask this question, we get further information. Hey, axis has to pass through center of mass. it has a certain criteria, how Earth uses its axis. We'll get further information on it. So what happens? Two things. We get clarity on the information. We'll get additional information. So this is what critical thinking does to you. Let me read some of the comments. In what way does mass distribution affect the axis of Earth? We already did this. How are they correlated? This is another interesting question. Mr. Shivam Singh, sorry. Why the ice cap melts more if evaporation is going? It will make again after coming of winter. This is another interesting question. Like, hey, if it is melting, can't it come back again? Right. So now you see there is a lot of scope of question on each and every information that we get. And if you don't do that, we are not converting that information into concepts. We are not converting that information into knowledge. It is mere information. Okay. I see some of you are still on that sky is blue question. We can move on to the next question that are on the screen. So, do you see why it is important for students? In a classroom, students should ask these questions. If they are not asking these questions, they are not learning things better. As a teacher, it is not your duty to ask questions from their point of view all the time. Right. So, as a teacher, you need to facilitator of the critical thinking. Hey, you really agree with it? What are the questions that you would ask? So, this is one of the way you can include critical thinking in your classrooms. But when you present an information, ask them to find out why you do not agree with it. Okay, you can note this down also. Tell them something and ask them why you do not agree with it. They'll develop a habit of evaluating things. They'll develop a habit of not agreeing with uh, any information, whether it is given by scientists or it is given by a novice or a beginner. Okay, let's take one more example. So this I'd want. So previous one, I gave my question. This I'd be interested to know your question. If you're reading like a student, so just imagine you're a teacher. You gave them this explanation, right? You have two choices: either to further explain it, or to let student ask question what is not clear to them. There are two kind of questions student will ask. They may ask that, "Hey, this word is not clear to me, ma'am. I did not understand anything, ma'am or sir." When a student say that, "Ma'am or sir, I did not understand anything," this question is not a critical thinking question. There has to be a context to the question. Ki, hey, like we said that, ki, hey, Earth is rotating at such a high speed, why don't we feel it? This is the critical thinking question. But when we say that, ki, hey, I don't agree with this information, this is not a correct, this is very broad question. We are not applying our critical thinking skill on it. Right. Now let's read this and you can type in your questions in the chat box wherein uh, that will lead you to get more information and develop a deeper understanding. You can even find contradictions in this statement. Okay, so it says that it is about the hail formation. It says that hails form when air carries water droplets well above the freezing level. This freezing process forms a hailstone, which can grow as additional water freezes onto it. Eventually, the hailstone becomes too heavy for the updraft to support it and it falls to the ground. So, regardless of you're a science teachers or from a different background, you can evaluate this. The more you are disconnected from the information, the more scope for you to do critical thinking on that. So, I'd love to see some of your critical thinking questions on this. How how does additional water gets added? Okay, this is more of an information seeking, more information seeking. So this is a good question, but may not be a precise critical thinking. In critical thinking question, we try to find contradiction, we try to judge, but this is also a part of interpretation. We are trying to interpret it. Ki, hey, how does additional water gets added? So this is First level of critical thinking, interpretation, that hey, I'm not very clear with this. Can there be hailstones during summers? So when you ask this question, ma'am, uh, this is not an example of a critical thinking from this paragraph point of view. Somebody say, after reading this question, if I say that, can there be hailstone during summers? This is not a critical thinking question. This is a good question that you can ask as a teacher to students, but we are not evaluating this information. Right? We have agreed to this information, then we are evaluating. Critical thinking question would try to be more contextual around the information that is given. What can anything be above freezing level? Okay. More questions? Okay. So what atmospheric conditions are needed necessary for the hail to form? Okay, these questions are there, but not directly related to critical thinking. We're asking additional information. Let me tell you some precise critical thinking question on this. It say that hail forms when air carries water droplets well above the freezing level. So first question would be that ki, hey, how can air carry water droplet to freezing level on a certain day? Why doesn't it happen all the day? Why on a certain day only it can take it to freezing level? Okay, so I don't agree with it. So whenever this idea is coming that hey, it doesn't look quite right to me. Why will it take it to above freezing level? Why it doesn't happen all the time? Then you get an answer that during summers, air rises up more. There is more kind of vertical circulation of wind. So if the cloud has to be formed here, it will form little higher. And as you go higher, the temperature decreases. I get an information. Right. This freezing process forms a hailstone, which can grow as additional water freezes onto it. We can even evaluate this. Hey, how additional water is getting onto it. Eventually, the hailstone becomes too heavy for the updraft to support it, and it falls to the ground. You'll ask a simple interpretation question over here that hey, what is updraft? Can you explain me further? So then you get an answer of the updraft. So here two level of things are going on. One is interpretation, which is first level of critical thinking, in which you ask that, hey, it is not clear to me. Can you explain this part to me? Evaluation is the next step when you ask that, hey, it doesn't look right to me. I have understood what you have said, but still I don't agree with it. That is a next level. That is the final level of critical thinking. Let's move further. Let's take more example. So this is our learning number 2. That critical thinking leads to deeper understanding. What was learning number 1? Can anybody write in the chat box? Learning number 2 is critical thinking leads to deeper understanding because we don't ask just questions, we ask good questions, we ask relevant questions. What was the first learning? First learning was something related to what is critical thinking. So may I know anybody? Yes, the first learning was critical thinking is an act of evaluating. Try to evaluate by judging. So, so I'm happy that you are with me. All right. So this is a second learning. So first is what is critical thinking. Second is critical thinking leads to deeper understanding. We saw how. Let's take some very interesting examples. So one thing that critical thinking can do is it can develop deeper understanding of concepts among students or among anyone. Now, another aspect of critical thinking is related to biases. Okay, now there's something very interesting graph on the screen. Many of you will not agree to that. We'll see what happens to it. Don't form your opinion here. This is not right. This is not wrong. So this is a data taken from some college source, from a well accepted source, and it was represented like this. There's an average math score of men versus women on a timeline. And the second graph says that average income of people in US and Mexico. Okay. Now, when this information is presented to you, you have two choices. One is to accept it and say that oh, men are better than women. Women are not good at maths. That is one way. Other will be to evaluate it further. Ki, hey, I want to know better context of it. I don't agree with it. Many of you will not agree. When I saw this first, I also did not agree with it. So we will judge it. We'll dig deeper into it. Right. So now we have moved on from the hailstone question. Uh, we have come to this biases. Okay, and I hope you can see this on the screen, and it gives a very interesting data about the men and the women score, average math score. It is taken from a source that is written here, and the second graph shows that US and Mexico. The moment we see this, what comes to your mind? The moment you see this, what comes to your mind, and will you agree with it? The data is correct. The way this data has been shown is correct, that I can tell. Uh, but what would you further do to dig deeper into it? Would you agree with that? There may be circumstances for women to have their performance being lower. Okay, yeah. So this is an interesting point that data has been taken in what circumstances, what sample size has been taken. That is the first question that you would come. That did you take the sample size from a country which is not uh, which does not have a lot of rights for the women? Did you take data from that country? They are not allowed to go to the school. Did you take data from that country? That is first level of thing. What are the other things, would you ask? Is the data worldwide or limited countries? Okay. Now, even if you leave aside those questions, I will show you something very interesting. Okay, let's move to the next part of it on the same graph. Now, what we did, we had two graphs on it. Now we have changed the scale of it. Okay, the moment we change the scale, the situation becomes a little better. Okay, the women and the men score are almost close. If you look at the previous one, you see a big gap. Okay, but in this case, the gap is very little. While in the second graph, the gap is still significant. Okay, it is not only about the gap itself. So one thing is the data was not correctly represented. It can always be misrepresented. We require our thinking brain to get at the bottom of it. But I'll show you something more interesting on it, and that will bring out some interesting facts about men and women score on the average. Now this data has now it is being tabulated very differently. This is a Gaussian curve. Like it says that okay, this is marks, on the y-axis is the marks, and the x-axis the number of people who are scoring that marks. It is giving altogether a different picture. While you look at the same question for the earning level Mexico and US, you see US is far ahead of Mexico. Okay, but how about in this case, women and men? You see that there is a very small fraction of men that are better than women. But if you just go past this line, okay, you will see that on the average, where there are majority of men and women are present, women are doing better than men. Right. In extreme cases, and that to a small chunk of men are doing better than women. Now you must have realized that how data can be misrepresented, misconstrued, and it is the critical thinking that will take you to the bottom of the things, and you will not be swayed by the perceptions, opinions, and your own biases. Now, why this example was shown, it is because humans are naturally biased. They try to oversimplify things, and they try to look things in black and white. Now, before I summarize this, I will take this opinion poll. Okay, I'm just creating a poll and I'm giving you three options A, B, and C. Okay, So now the poll is open. Question is here on the screen. How did the now here's another question. You have to tell your own opinion. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disaster change over the last 100 years? More than doubled, remained the same, decreased to less than half. Over the last 100 years, it is seen, average out. So overwhelming majority is going for option A, but it is fast decreasing also. Okay, you take more time. You have to take a guess. So you don't have to judge here. You have to just take a guess. What does your intuition say? What is your opinion? What is your opinion on it? Okay, so still a good majority says more than double. Let me end the poll. We'll see the correct data. Okay, so I've ended the poll, and here's the data. 59% of the people say more than double. 30% remain the same. Sorry, 30% say that decrease less than half, and B says remain the same. Okay, let us see the what is the correct thing. This is the deaths from disaster data for the last 100 years, so 1900 to 2000, and you can see it has almost come negligible, negligibly low. This is deaths per million from the natural disaster on the average. And what was the overwhelming opinion over here? That it has increased. Right. Now, why this comes to you? Why we tend to answer as it has increased? This is a bias in the human brain. There's nothing right or wrong to it. Every human has all kind of biases. This is called as negativity instinct. So humans have that negativity instinct. We tend to see negative things more. We tend to see more number of deaths. We have more remembrance of natural calamities in the past years, and only those comes in our focus. We remember those things, but we forget that into account that hey, in the today's in the modern world, we have a lot of infrastructure to stop the death from the natural calamity. The moment tsunami comes, we get to hear tsunami has come, but that alarm, that red alert is sounded as early as possible, in fact, weeks in advance. That was not possible in 1910, 1920s. Whenever tsunami used to come, it was to sweep people away. It was to create a havoc and a complete disaster, and used to kill people in thousands and sometimes in 10,000s. Right. So the poll is over. Okay. So these questions were to show you how our mind plays with our rational thinking, and it is always first thought which may not be rational, and it is a critical thinking that is. So now, learning one was critical thinking is judgment. Learning two was critical thinking leads to a deeper understanding, and learning three is that humans have biases. We just now saw this. Critical thinking makes us aware of the biases. An example of a bias: humans have liking to oversimplify the information, often leading to incorrect understanding or judgment. So we often think in black and white, in binaries, good or bad, rich or poor, violent or peaceful, capitalist or socialist, sweet or bitter. But the extremes are never always present. It is a mixture of both that is present. But our brain will always say that, hey, this city is really good, this city is not good. Okay. So let's move further to our third idea. So we discussed what is critical thinking. It is judgment. Why critical thinking is important? Because it leads to deeper understanding. Without that, students are just getting information. They are not retaining that. They are not creating connections in the brain. They are not judging it. They are not getting the knowledge. Now, who are critical thinkers? There is a process of evaluation. Whenever information is presented, they question. And it's not always necessary that they have to ask question to somebody. They can put a question in their own brain, and it may happen that they can answer that question immediately as soon as it crops up. But the mind should continuously be questioning to yourself as well. They're skeptical. They always doubt things. They want to develop a deeper understanding. So their intention is not to prove somebody wrong, but they say that hey, unless I get convinced, I won't deem it to be have understood, regardless of whatever marks I get. Their questions are targeted towards finding the truth. So their questions are not random. Their questions are not unrelated. It could be, but whenever they are doing critical thinking, it should have a clear objective for understanding. They are open-minded and aware about biases. This is an important trait of a critical thinker. Okay. So if you are doing all of these things and if you can make students orient in this direction, then they are becoming critical thinkers. An agreeable student who is agreeing to everything and may be doing really well, may face challenges in higher grades in the real world. Now let's look at, quickly get into that. We're already reached our time, but we'll quickly discuss some of the nuanced version of critical thinking, and it'll just take us 15 more minutes. So critical thinking, some of the skills and behavior. Critical thinking is becoming more critical in the modern world because there's a lot of information. Information is not a kind of necessity. Like there's no dearth of access to information. It is easily accessible. So all that is needed is that what kind of information do we absorb, and even if the information is correct given to us, are we converting it into knowledge? So it is ranked as second top skill by World Economic Forum after complex problem solving. So do you see complex problem solving is a different skill? Critical thinking is a different one. It is a skill needed for future jobs that we have not seen. Okay. So critical thinking is divided into certain skills and certain behavior. Again, I'd like to question you that what do you think is difference between skill and behavior? So teachers over here, okay, can anyone just guess this? What is the difference between skill and behavior? I'm sure somebody's thinking about it. So you can stop typing your responses for previous questions. You can focus your attention to the question in hand. Here is what is the difference between skill and behavior? Skill is an art, behavior is an act. Okay, skills are competencies. Skills is about what you can do, and behavior is how you act. I think this is very close, which Miss Richa Joshi, others were also related. Skill is your ability, right, that you can own by practicing. Behavior is your innate propensity, your disposition, that how you act in a certain situation. For example, uh, I have a skill of mathematics. I have a skill of addition. I can add numbers very fast. But my behavior could be that I'm a lazy person. Right. If I'm a lazy and I have that skill, it don't add up. It won't help me. Other example that I have a skill of understanding. I can understand, I have a good language skill, I can interpret something better, but I'm not curious. Propensity is not being curious. So again, they don't add up. If I'm not curious, I have a good skill of language. It will not. I will not be able to take full use of my skill. So behaviors are important that push you to do certain things. Okay. Let's look at some of those names in detail. Quickly, we'll go a sneak peek into skills and behavior. So all this while we have looked at this behavior of evaluation. Evaluation is a behavior. So let me go back here again. So four important skills that I have mentioned here: evaluation, analysis, reasoning, and interpretation. Let's look at it one by one. Evaluation is about questioning and finding the truth. For example, somebody said that you told me that this example, you told me that now I'm getting those. So I think there's some delay in your responses that I see. So I get to see many more responses that are there. Skill is the ability, reflection of a subject. Skill is doing actively. Skill is a talent. Behavior is a habit. This is again very close. Skill is ability. Behavior is habit. Skill is management to handle things. Okay. Behavior is inbuilt. Skill is this is again important. Behavior is inbuilt. It is somewhat innate that we gather from the experiences that we have. It is difficult to master, but it can also be changed. But skills can easily be owned, can easily be learned. Right. For example, curiosity at a certain age, it's difficult to. I mean, all kids are have that behavior of curious. They have not learned any skill. It is their behavior, but sometimes we don't nurture that curiosity, and that behavior goes away. It wanes out. Okay. So evaluation. Let's come back to this each and every. We are now discussing one by one each skill. So evaluation. So for example, information is presented. You told me that gravity acts on all objects. I'll evaluate that. Ki, hey, is gravity? I don't think it is acting on all objects. It doesn't act on moon. To my mind, doesn't act on cloud. It is not acting on hot air balloon. How can you say that? This is evaluation. I'm finding the contradiction. But I need once I ask this question, I'll get more information. Then I'll understand. Okay. Okay, next skill is interpretation. So we are going a little technical here in terms of the finer skills needed. Evaluation is a broad, a very core skill of critical thinking, but interpretation is also important. This comes a level before evaluation. There are two examples here. Which of the two statements are easy to interpret? First statement says that I drive my car very fast in the city. Second says that I navigate through an urban area with a consistent velocity of 70 kilometers per hour. Here we don't have to evaluate. Interpret means to make sense of an information. Okay. So yeah, first statement, right? First statement is quite simple, quite straightforward. Second statement for us it is simple, but relatively it's difficult because sorry, I may not know the meaning of navigate. I may not know the meaning of velocity, consistent, right? So I may not fully comprehend the statement. So comprehending a statement is one step before evaluation. And I need to first get what you are saying. Then only I'll find out what is right or wrong. Okay. So interpretation means to make sense of an information, which is one level before evaluation. Now, once I understand this end statement that I navigate through an urban area with a consistent velocity of 70 kilometers per hour, then I'll evaluate this information. Now the question will come to my mind, ki, hey, within an urban area, which means that it was not a national highway, how could you drive at 70 kilometers per hour? I'm raising a doubt in the statement. Ki, hey, 70 kilometers per hour is a very high speed. Was it was it at 4 a.m. in the morning and roads were empty? Did you drive? Or do you usually drive at that speed? If you drive at that speed, how do you do that? Uh, do you haven't you ever met an accident with it, or do you have a particular skill? This is evaluation. So now do you see distinctness between interpretation and evaluation? Interpretation is understanding the meaning. Here now I understand what you're trying to say, but I don't agree with it. I have some doubts on it. Right. So this is a pure form of a second level of critical thinking, which is evaluation, a central idea of critical thinking. Okay. Now, other skills that help you become a critical thinker is reasoning. So, can anyone answer this question? Although the answer is also is given in the statement, no need to answer. Reasoning means it's a ability to correlate information, which is again not a pure form of a critical thinking. But if you are good at reasoning, you will do good critical thinking. So premise one says that all mammals breathe air. Premise two says that whales are mammals. So which means that whales breathe air. This is reasoning skill. And this is one of the skills that are generally addressed in the school system for competitive exams. Pattern recognition, reasoning like this. Okay, so this is one skill that helps you become a critical thinker. But doing this is not a pure form of critical thinking. Another skill is analysis. Okay, can anybody tell me that when we say analysis, what comes to your mind? So we are at 41st page. So we just spend 5 more minutes and then we'll be concluding the session. And now, what does analysis mean to you? Research. Okay, it's a very good word for the word analysis. Research. Breaking information into simple steps. This is a precise definition of analysis. Okay, now the definition is already coming here. Analysis means to break down information. Why do we need to break down information? Because we as a human try to oversimplify things. Suppose I have to find a dentist. Finding a dentist is a complex case. Let's break down the information available. Right, it's already written there. I have to find a dentist in my locality. My biased brain will go to a close friend and I'll ask that who is the good dentist in our locality. Can you tell me? Although it is not a high stake problem, we can still do with that. But whenever it comes to a big decision like buying a house, renting a house, then the analysis becomes buying a share of a company, it becomes important. But if you don't do analysis or break down information, then most there's a very high chance that we'll take a incorrect decision. Let's see how do we do analysis of a finding a dentist. We will break down the criteria first. On which criteria are going to judge a dentist? So we are going to find it's his or her Google rating, the other mobile ratings, distance from your place, cost factor. Then, of course, it will come reviews from friends and families, doctor experience. We can think of more parameters. So, what we have done, we have broken down the decision making process into 6 smaller steps. It becomes very easy, a data driven approach for to judge on these 6 parameters. We may find that this particular doctor is good in 4 parameters, not so good in other two. We'll get the data of all the doctors. Then we need to give weightage to each and every parameter, and then we'll get a final score for each doctor. That will be your analytical way to make a decision, and that is a part of critical thinking. So many of you are rightly saying that examining something, R&D. But how do we do R&D for such case? We break down information, analyzing, which means breaking down information to arrive at a conclusion. Often we don't do. We get swayed by our biases and popular opinion, and that lands us in a trouble, maybe in a trouble situation or in suboptimal, gives us a suboptimal solution. So we discussed 4 skills: interpretation, evaluation is the core of it, reasoning, and analysis. So these 4 skills can be developed among students by doing exactly what I did. You wanted to make them do analysis, give them more cases like this, but you have to make a very well planned structure for that. It may not be very open ended. Another association and reasoning type question. So this is a very important example Miss Renuka Mule has given. This also leads to critical thinking because in assertion and reasoning type of question, you try to evaluate whether this reason is the correct reason for the assertion or not. You are evaluating that. So asking reasoning assertion type of question will indeed lead to a critical thinking. Okay, let's move further. More in a cases of analysis, which city is better to live in, Mumbai or Bangalore? A very complex situation. We need to get many parameters, objective. Which area in Bangalore is more suitable for opening an ice cream parlor? Whitefield Main Road or Kundalhalli? If you're familiar with Bangalore names. Uh, again, a thorough analysis is needed to make that decision. Okay. Now coming to the last part of it, quickly we'll wrap it up. How can you teach critical thinking? you allocate a critical thinking class. So one thing is you can bring this approach in your day-to-day teaching, that you allow students to question, but you have to be very clear in what kind of question they are asking. If they are just asking that, ma'am, I did not understand, or sir, I did not understand, or they're asking remote questions, then that is not critical thinking. You need to bring them to the context of it. Hey, this is the information. Ask based, what is asked based on this question. Train the teachers on only a few critical thinking. So, which means train yourself on doing this first. And we have material on this. If you want, we can share some of those. Create simple case studies where students need not answer the question but question the answers, evaluate the proof. You can create a course out of this, but we at Open Door have created some courses for grade 6 and 8 students where we train the teachers, we give them some materials to do it so that they can work on the critical thinking skill. Okay, so this is the summary of the today's session. Critical thinking is the skill of evaluating or judging an information. Critical evaluation leads to deeper understanding. Humans evolved to have biases and instincts. Critical thinking makes you aware of it. Critical thinking can be improved by working on critical thinking skills and behaviors, or other words, dispositions. Critical thinking, lastly, but very important, it can be taught in the school. So it is a skill like any other skill, like carpentry, which can be developed. Now imagine that if student learn critical thinking, teachers' effort drastically goes down in making them understand things because they become better at understanding. So this is the end of our presentation on critical thinking. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for being interactive and engaging all through. I hope you enjoyed the session and had learnings. You can share your feedback on the chat box if there are any, and comments. I'd love to read those out. And if there is feedback on for the next session that I could have added, that also you can write. Thank you so much for all of those who found it wonderful and interesting. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining the session. I truly appreciate the time you have invested, and I'm sure you try to employ some of these in your classes. And if you need further help, we will be open door. Would be happy to help you out. Thank you so much. Now I am ending the stream. Have a great day.